Let's begin with the SCO, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India happens to be the president of the SCO this year, and that's why all the defense ministers seem to be in town, other than Pakistan, of course, which is joining virtually. The foreign ministers of the SCO countries will be here next week. This clearly is a big year for India in diplomacy. The G20 presidency is also with India. But the SCO, of course, has some interesting dynamics, if I can call them that, because of the countries present, which include both China and Pakistan. And I don't have to tell you about India's relations with either China or Pakistan. Now, less than 10 days ago, terrorists trained by Pakistan ambushed and killed 5 Indian Army soldiers in Jammu and Kashmir. Just weeks ago, China tried to act smart and announced new names of places located in the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. So today, defense ministers of Pakistan and China are there putting on a very civilized diplomatic veneer, talking about how relations can be built forward. But there's obviously an issue with this. And India has tried to make it clear that the running with the hares and the hunting with the hounds will not work. It cannot work forever. Just yesterday, India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh told his Chinese counterpart that the violation of border agreements with Beijing had to stop. These have eroded the entire basis of relations between the two countries, and until this is fixed, relations cannot be expected to go back to normal. Now, the dynamics of all of this do play out to some extent in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This, of course, is a grouping of 8 nations with regional security as one of its main aims. However, India cannot expect that the duplicitous behavior of China or Pakistan is going to be called out at SCO platforms. Before I tell you why, let's take a brief look at the history of the SCO. This was an initiative led by China with Russia's support. The SCO was formed in 2001 by leaders of China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, Central Asia, Russia and China. Then in 2017, India and Pakistan both became full members of the SCO. Now obviously, Russia wanted India there and China said, India is not joining until Pakistan joins, so both India and Pakistan came in. So it's clear from all of that that the grouping is somewhat dominated by China, with Pakistan as a crucial vassal ally state adding its voice. Additionally, Russia, which has been India's key sponsor or India's key partner, not just in the SCO but everywhere else in the world, is increasingly becoming dependent on China. Ever since it invaded Ukraine, Russia has been dependent on China. Economically, it's very dependent on China. And so it has to start listening a little bit more to what China says. China clearly has been trying to expand its influence in Central Asia through its Belt and Road Initiative. So, murky waters, and how can India best navigate this diplomatic and strategic minefield to protect its own interests and to keep China and Pakistan at bay? Will the upcoming Quad summit in May be a better platform for India to formulate a response to Beijing and Pakistan? Well, almost certainly, because there's no divergence of interests out there. However, people still say it is good for India to be part of the SCO because it's better to try and influence what's happening here rather than sitting outside and complaining. So what should be our expectations from the SCO, from this meeting and also in the long term? It's a pleasure to be joined by 2 of the sharpest thinkers whom I know of when it comes to strategic affairs and foreign relations. It's a great pleasure to be joined by former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Kanwal Sibal, who's also been the former ambassador to Russia. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us on this show. Also with us, Indrani Bagchi, CEO of the Ananta Aspen Center and a prominent foreign policy thinker. Thank you both so much for being with us. Now, clearly, these are interesting times. You've got the Chinese in town, the Russians are in town, the Pakistanis could be coming to town next week. All of this at a time when there have not really been too many contacts and too many relations with any of them. So a complicated strategic setup. Why don't I start with you, Ambassador Sibal? What would be your expectation from these meetings, the defense ministers meeting and then the foreign ministers meeting?
We are an Asian country. And this region is very important to us. We cannot afford to see this region under the control of China or Russia entirely, or the 2 of them. And we left out because in so many ways, we have very important interests there. We've had historically very good ties with Central Asian countries. They have been interested in reaching out to us in order to balance their own relationships, especially with China. They see a rising India, they want to be able to benefit from it. We have connectivity projects which would link India with these countries. We have to absolutely counter Pakistan's long efforts to keep us detached from this area and not give us access to it, because they see that if India increases its presence in this region, it'll be, from their point of view, at the cost of their geopolitical interests. But more importantly, Afghanistan is the centerpiece of many of these concerns in this region, especially terrorism, religious extremism. This is a concern for us, for the Central Asian countries, for Russia, and for China in its own way because of Xinjiang and Uyghur issue. Therefore, we need to keep a tab on this.
Right, Indrani, if I can turn to you next. If you're looking at the dynamics out here, the Chinese in town, Pakistanis coming to town, what would be your overall expectations? Are the dynamics India, Pakistan, India, China, are they going to dominate this, or is there going to be something else?
If you remember, the Chinese foreign minister was here for the SCO, for the G20 foreign ministers meeting, and he will be here for the SCO foreign ministers meeting. SCO, though, is literally run by China, because China is the dominant power in SCO. Russia may have started there. Russia is no longer anywhere in the reckoning, and Russia, because of the Ukraine war, has become too much of a subsidiary or a subservient partner to China, whatever their thinking may be, whatever their sentiments may be. The facts on the ground don't favor Russia. But to add to what Mr. Sibal just said, I'd say the other reason why this is an important year for SCO and why countries in the Central Asia are also looking to balance China and Russia is the Ukraine war, because the Ukraine war has not made them comfortable at all. Definitely not with where Russia is going with the war, and the kind of geopolitical fault lines that have been created, which puts a question on these countries as well. Not to speak of us, of course, but definitely on these countries as well. And they are right there at Russia's doorstep. If Russia suddenly decides to do another Ukraine in another country, then it's hard for these countries. And as Mr. Sibal said, Afghanistan remains a problem, and Afghanistan remains a problem not merely because the Taliban are back in Kabul, but the role that Russia plays in Afghanistan, the role that China wants to play in Afghanistan. Please remember that China has just apparently signed a $10 billion deal for a lithium mine in Afghanistan. That's, playing with fire in a very, very volatile area. Right. The Taliban are back. The ISK is back. It's a region in deep flux.
Ambassador Sibal, if you look at the overall world, it's a very different world to what it was when you were the ambassador to Russia and when the SCO was first being spoken about. India itself has obviously risen a lot in power and in status, and its importance has grown. China become far more aggressive, perhaps far more domineering, far more dominating, and the imprint of China being very clearly felt across the world. And when it comes to Russia itself, there are some who would argue that it's starting to become a bit of a junior partner to China after the war in Ukraine, very heavily dependent on China in many ways. So would it be fair to say that it is somewhat incongruous for India to be sitting inside an organization which seems to be so heavily dominated by China as it is right now? Russia almost coming across as a somewhat subservient entity to China at the present moment.
You see, there's a division of labor, if you like, between Russia and China and Central Asia. And they have devised a mechanism by which there is a balance of interest there. On the security side, it's Russia that is dominant. They have the CSTO, which looks after the security of many of these countries. And then you have the economic part where clearly China dominates. The second thing is that there are a lot of reservations in Central Asia about China. They don't want to become prisoners of China. They don't want the Chinese to just take over their economies as they have done. Because the manner in which China operates, they destroy any local production. They also want, therefore, to have some kind of a balance within the SCO, and that is where India also potentially comes in. That's the second part. The third is there are a lot of Kazakhs in Xinjiang. So there are ethnic issues involved there. And at the end of the day, these are Islamic countries. One must not forget that. The manner in which China treats its Muslim minority could not be lost upon them entirely, though, of course, they themselves are very open-minded and secular, but not really. The other thing is that there are a lot of immigrants or whatever you like from Central Asia into Russia. And they, in fact, are dominating some sectors of the economy, as I have seen myself, especially fresh fruits, vegetables, and stuff like that. They send a lot of remittances home. This is not the case with China. And therefore, there is a huge economic linkage between these countries. Now, it is true that after Ukraine and the fact that Russia is trying to protect the Russian-speaking minorities, there's a bit of an issue in Kazakhstan. But also don't remember when there was an uprising against the president. Who came in to restore the president is the Russians.
Right.
So there are all these, see, in all these countries and in all these situations, there are nuances and everything else, but you have to look at the total picture and not simplify it to say that, Russia has become a junior partner or subsidiary or lost all power. It's not true. It's not true. But one part, of course, is true that China economically has become very dominant, no doubt.
All right, looking at some of the other factors that could start to play out in the SCO, I know, Indrani, that there were a lot of companies in Europe who were somewhat startled by a statement made by a Chinese diplomat, which obviously the Chinese have been trying to walk back a little bit, but a statement essentially saying that the borders of the USSR should be remembered and the sovereignty of some of the countries that were once in the USSR are in some way not defined. Now, the Baltic states and others have been more than a little bit concerned about that. I'm sure that statement will be causing a certain amount of ripples in the SCO. Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, they were all also former USSR republics. So somewhat in the same position. Are they scratching their heads and saying, where is all of this going?
Chinese diplomats are not known to be speaking off the cuff, if you know what I mean. Sort of personal statements are really not their forte. So yes, and the question then arises, is China doing this as a unilateral gesture, or are they doing it as a with a silent prod from Moscow? We don't know. But the fact remains that it is a matter of concern.
Ambassador Sibal, one last word from you then. If I understood you correctly, you seem to be saying, look, there are lots of dynamics and lots of things that are going to be playing out, especially with Pakistan and China. But it's better for India to be sitting inside the SCO and trying to shape what is happening than sitting outside it and just complaining.
China is sitting on our borders, 50,000 troops, 60,000 troops, God knows, 100,000 troops, some say, all across the border. We are talking to them. We've had 18 rounds of discussions bilaterally. So what's the difficulty in being in a multilateral organization along with China? Our defense minister has met the Chinese defense minister in the past. Our foreign minister has met the Chinese foreign minister several times. So that dialogue continues. And if that dialogue continues within a larger forum, it is not unhelpful. And number two, it is part of the understanding in the SCO that bilateral issues will not be raised. And one of the reasons why there were some concerns about bringing Pakistan in was that Pakistan will start raising bilateral issues with India. But this is looked down upon. So the SCO has developed a kind of an ambience in which this is discouraged. You remember that in one of the meetings, the Pakistanis tried to show a flag, a map of Pakistan which showed wrongly the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And the Russians asked them to take it down. So I don't think that this is any problem. We have to look at the long term.
Right.
We must, as a regional country, as a rising country, have a foot in every possible multilateral organization. So therefore, so that our influence is felt and we are able to steer the discussions as much as possible in our interests. That is the purpose.
Right, Indrani. Now, everywhere in the world there's been a lot of talk about how India has been managing a tightrope walk ever since the Ukraine war really started. And that is being underlined by all of these meetings that are happening. SCO right now, Quad's going to be meeting shortly. Then you're going to have the G20 happening at the same time. Do you think this tightrope walk is sustainable and necessary in a multipolar world? Or do you think India is going to be forced to choose sides at some point or the other?
It is, Vikram, we have no choice. The world is, we'll be watching the world in a sort of a geopolitical flux. And it is as important for us to be part of the Quad as it is for us to be in the SCO. Because these are, as well as the BRICS, we keep forgetting the BRICS, but the BRICS is, again, the BRICS, another organization that's dominated by China, but we need to be there. We need to be in the room. We need to be in the rule-making space for all of these discussions. Just to say that because we don't like the Chinese and right now the Russians are a headache, that we shouldn't be in the room? Absolutely not. In fact, we should not give countries like Pakistan oxygen in organizations like this. Absolutely. So we should be there. And it's important for us to be able to steer these organizations.
All right, former Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal and the CEO of the Ananta Aspen Center, Indrani Bagchi, thank you both so much for joining us with that perspective.